Good afternoon, everyone. In this session, I'm going to talk about The Scarlet Letter. It's a novel written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. He is basically reputed as one of the short story writer, and later he established himself as a very prominent writer in American literature as well as in English literature. Yeah, let me start my lecture with the introduction, a brief introduction regarding the author or the novelist who had written this novel. This is a novel entitled The Scarlet Letter. It is a novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which was published in 1850. It is considered as a masterpiece of American literature and a classical and as well as a classic as a moral study. So Nathaniel Hawthorne, who lived between 1804 and 1864, he was, as I have already mentioned, that he established earlier himself as a short story writer and later as a novelist. He was one of the foremost 19th century writers in America. He was born on 4th July 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts, as Nathaniel Hawthorne. He later added W to avoid association with one of his ancestors, Judge Hawthorne. So his Puritan ancestors were the first settlers in the states and later included two prominent judges. By Hawthorne's time, the family had retired from public eminence. As a writer, Hawthorne was an activist in writing and published at his own expense a novel called Fanshawe. Okay, Fanshawe. This was his first novel, which was published in 1828. And he quickly felt that it was not up to his quality and attempted to remove all of those copies. So later, for the next several years, he created many impressive works such as An Old Man's Tale, The Hollow of the Three Hills, and My Kinsman, Major Mollins, and Roger Malvin's Burial, and Young Goodman Brown. And in 1937, Hawthorne published his first commercial book, Twice Told Tales, with little financial gain. And this novel, this commercial text, the Twice Told Tales, fetched him name and fame as a novelist. Let me give you the summary of this novel, a gist of this novel. In a nutshell, The Scarlet Letter, this novel is set in a village in Puritan England. Okay, the main character here in this novel is Hester Prynne, a young woman who has born a child out of wedlock. This is how the novel begins in this. This is how the story begins in this novel. So here we get introduced to the main character called Hester Prynne. She is a young woman who born a child in the very first chapter, where the first scene itself, out of wedlock. So Hester believes herself as a widow, but her husband Robert Shillingworth arrives in New England very much alive and conceals his identity later. Okay, so he finds his wife forced to wear the scarlet letter A on her dress as a punishment for her adultery. So, in a nutshell, this novel called The Scarlet Letter, the Scarlet Letter is A. The Scarlet is it's of a red color. Okay, so this letter, this is a story. The story of the novel revolves around this letter. So, in your examination, you may get a questions like bring out the significance of the title, The Scarlet Letter. Okay, so why Hester Prynne is forced to wear that letter on her dress? Because it embodies and it shows the punishment for her adultery because she bore a child out of wedlock, which the Puritan society was against of it. Got it? So after Hester Prynne refuses to name her lover, Shillingworth, her husband, becomes obsessed with finding his identity. When he learns that the man in question is Arthur Dimmesdale, a saintly young minister of that particular village, who is the leader of those who exhorting her to name the child's father, Shillingworth proceeds to torment Arthur Dimmesdale. But stricken by guilt, Dimsdale becomes increasingly ill, and Hester herself is revealed to be a self reliant heroine who is never truly repentant for committing adultery with the minister because she feels that their act was consecrated by their deep love for one another. for each other. So, although she is initially scorned, over time her compassion and dignity silence many of her critics. And later, she becomes as an angel in the eyes of the villagers who had committed adultery in the beginning. Got it? So at the end, Shillingworth is morally degraded by his monomaniacal pursuit of revenge. So Dimsdale is broken by his own sense of guilt, and he publicly confesses that his adultery before dying in Hester's arms. So only Hester can face the future bravely as she prepares to begin a new life with her daughter Pearl in Europe. So years later, Hester Prynne returns to New England where she continues to wear the scarlet letter. After her death, she is buried next to Dimsdale, a young minister, and their joint tombstone is inscribed with on a field sable, the letter A gives. So this is the gist of this novel. Very interesting novel. That's why I told you this can be considered as a classic moral story. So let me give you a critical analysis of this novel, because so far you had come to know about the story or the plot line of this novel. Then how do we critically analyze this novel, and what are the critical opinion about this novel? So, as I have mentioned earlier, that this novel is revolves around the scarlet letter A that Hester is forced to wear is finely embroidered with gold colored thread. Okay, and it's the outline of that letter is embroidered with gold color thread. Actually, that letter is of crimson, that scarlet red. So as both as a badge of shame and a beautifully wrought human artifact, it reflects the many oppositions in the novel, such as those between orders and transgression, civilization and wilderness, and adulthood and childhood. Okay, so this letter acts as a very prominent symbol in this novel. The more society strives to keep out wayward passion, the more it reinforces the split between appearance and reality. So, the members of the community, we are talking about the Puritans here. So, Hawthorne is giving us the Puritan society and how adultery was treated, and how it was those who were committed that adultery, the sin, it was considered as a sin in the eyes of Puritans. So the members of that community who are ostensibly the most respectable are often the most depraved. So while the apparent sinners are often the most virtuous people. Okay, so what are the then? If this is the story of adultery and punishment, or so on, or the social Puritanism, then what would be the themes of this story or themes of this novel? There are many themes here, because Hawthorne is a wonderful creator, wonderful novelist who deals with more themes at one point of time. Okay, and at a time he had that kind of ability, and he skillfully drawn this themes in this novel. So for his novels, Nathaniel Hawthorne drew on Puritan Orthodox thought to examine the individual and collective consciousness under the pressure of suffering. So he sought to dramatize themes such as sin, guilt, and punishment. Okay, so these are the important three themes which are dealt in this novel. They are sin, guilt, and punishment. So his writing is marked by introspective depth, okay, and an urge to get inside the character he had created. So here, who is the central character who deals with all these things, sin, guilt, and punishment? Hester Prynne, and even Dimsdale, and later Shillingworth. His writing is marked by introspective depth, as I told you that. He attempts to give a genuine picture of the times by presenting a realistic setting and a real puritanical philosophies. So the writer Hawthorne frequently focused more on a character's inner struggle or a central theme than on heated encounters between characters. But it is somewhat like he wants to deal with the philosophical and spiritual aspects and their thinking, or what we can say, the struggle of the central characters here. So, one of Hawthorne's recurring themes throughout his works was his own view of human nature. and how he deals with the human beings, and he doesn't want to deal with the characters or the compare and the comparison and contrast between the characters. Instead, he wants to deal with the inner psyche of the characters, each and every character in his novels. So he explores an interesting human psychology through his exploration of the dark side of human consciousness. So, in this particular novel, The Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne introduced a profound comment on the breakdown of human relationships in the society of the 17th century. So, he is giving us a picture of the 17th century Puritan England, where and when and how human beings were treated, and how what kind of punishment uh, used to be given for the sinners. Got it? So Hawthorne's theme that human nature is full of wickedness is also evident in Young Goodman Brown, when the title character faced great difficulty in is resisting temptation. So Hawthorne's modern themes were modeled by his own religious beliefs. For example, he raised question concerning the morality and the necessity of Hester Prynne's exile in this novel, The Scarlet Letter. One reason for these inquiries was Hawthorne's disbelief in heaven, hell, angels, or devils, since modern science was undermining the Bible. So he also employed allegory as a way of presenting themes in this novel. And he achieved it by placing characters in a situation outside of the ordinary context. So he explored the themes of penance, you know the penance, which means repentance for sins, and cowardliness, when Dimsdale struggled with himself to make his sin public, because he was a young minister and he was so much in dilemma, and he was so much of afraid, because if he commits, or if he accepts his guilt, so what would the public think of him? Whereas Hester Prynne, she doesn't care for all this public appearance. She wants to be true to her art. Okay, so in conclusion, Hawthorne's literary style did indeed contain elements such as description and dialogues which seemed out of place when compared to modern 20th century literature. So, however, Hawthorne's style was typical of the literary style of his time. So then, what are the styles and techniques used by Hawthorne? Nathaniel Hawthorne shaped his own literary style, although his writing style was viewed as outdated when compared to modern literature. Because though he belongs to um, the beginning of the 19th century, but he wanted to portray the 17th century Puritan England. So obviously, he was considered as an outdated writer when compared to modern literature. But whatever he said and whatever he wanted to portray was excellent. Okay, so he conveyed modern themes of psychology and human nature through the use of allegory and symbolism, and we have to study his novels in order to know his unique style and unique way of expressing the things and ideas through his use of allegory and symbolism. So during his time when he wrote these novels, printing technology was not as advanced enough to reproduce photographs in books. So, therefore, Hawthorne frequently wrote lengthy visual descriptions. One example of such a description in this novel, when Hawthorne intricately describes the prison door and its surroundings, and even the scenes. There are three scaffold scenes in this novel. They also play a very pivotal role, and they are very important for the examination sake. Okay, please, in order to understand this novel, you must be thorough with these three scaffold scenes. Got it? So in order to his artistic talent has been displayed in the way he had described the prison door of the Boston and its surroundings. So another aspect of his writing which was exclusive to his time was the use of formal dialogue, which remained consistent from character to character. Okay, he adopted this technique partly from a British writer, Sir Walcott Scott, whose works were popular in the United States and Great Britain. So Sir Scott used an unknown mysterious character whose main function is to add mystery and complicate the plot, complicate the story. So he had borrowed this idea or this technology or this technique of storytelling from Sir Walcott Scott, a great writer. Got it. So the caricature of minor characters, somebody exaggerated or distorted, was found in Sir Scott's works. We find a likeness of that in Mr. Sibbins in this novel. So, although his dialogues were overly formal, it was an accurate tool to describe human emotion. He also uses some of the techniques used in theaters. For example, the action in his novels are seen as if they were being enacted on stage. So, how this is how he beautifully and artistically, creatively describes each and every episode, each and every scene, and each and every situation of the character. So, the audience point of view is of much importance. Also, the reflections of some characters are perceived as asides. So, he was also fascinated by some of the many devices of the Gothic novel. Okay, so Gothic novels are mysterious novels which deals with the mysterious things. Okay, so he used them immediately in the initial chapter when describing the Scarlet Letter and the effects it provokes on Hester Prynne and it provokes on other characters in the novel. Later, with the description of Hester's dark prison, Bellingham's elaborately decorated mansion, and with a sinister description of the Puritan ministers. So, these are the scenes where we could find his creativity. So, besides, we find some gothic elements in Schillingworth's appearance. Okay, so let me deal with the important themes of this novel, important symbols of this novel, along with the detailed storyline. As I have mentioned earlier, that when the novel opens, we have a preceding plot of the Scarlet Letter, and which is an essay called "The Custom House." Okay, in it, the narrator says that he found a mysterious package dating back 2 centuries on the second floor of Salem Custom House, where he worked as a surveyor of the revenue. So the here I told you we have an unknown mysterious narrator who narrates as a story where he is working as a surveyor of a revenue where he had got found a mysterious package which dated back 2 centuries on the second floor of Salem Custom House. So the package contained a ragged piece of red cloth in the shape of the letter A. So, and a manuscript describing the story of a young woman who required to wear the letter as a symbol of shame for committing adultery. So, Hawthorne then informs the reader that the plot of the Scarlet Letter tells the story of that young woman as he imagines it to have unfolded. So, as I had mentioned earlier, that the setting of the novel is in Puritan Boston of the 1600. There lives a woman called Hester Prynne. So she is a native of that village in England. The novel tells us about her background through dialogues and flashback techniques. So after marrying a scholar, okay, he is her husband is none other than Roger Schillingworth. I told you. So, after marrying a scholar who spent long hours in studying or turning pages over books of the books, Hester and her husband moved to Amsterdam, Holland. They lived there for some time before deciding to begin a fresh life or a new life in colonial America. So he sent her alone to the town of Boston in the Massachusetts Bay Colony while he remained behind to conclude business before following her across the sea. But in the next 2 years, he never arrived, and the citizen of Boston presumed him to be dead. So during these 2 years, Hester committed adultery and bore a child and she with whom she had committed adultery with the young minister Arthur Dimmesdale. So the action of the story, or the action of this novel, the Scarlet Letter, begins at the town prison where Hester is being held, which prison? Boston prison. So, according to the moral code of the Puritans, adultery is a grave crime. Okay, it's a heinous crime. The punishment is death. However, the Boston authorities spare her life because she has a small child in her hands. So instead, they impose two humiliating penalties. The first one, she must, for the rest of her life, should wear a patch of red cloth in the shape of letter A, which stands for adultery. Got it? So, which also shows her as an adulteress on her chest. So, the second punishment was that she must stand on the pillory in the marketplace to endure the burn of reproving eyes. Hester had made the scarlet letter herself and bordering it with gold thread so that it looked like a work of art. So, when she comes out of the prison, she carries herself proudly, and this is how the writer writes: the young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. So this is considered as the first scaffold scene, okay, where this is how Hawthorne describes: the young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of features and richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and with a deep black eyes. She was ladylike too, after the manner of feminine gentility of those days. So, this is how he describes the beauty and the personality of our heroine, Hester Prynne. So, after arriving at the marketplace, she endures the glare of the townspeople while cradling her infant. So, as Hester looks out over the crowd, she notices a small misshapen man and recognizes him as her long lost husband, so who has been presumed lost at sea. She thought that her husband was dead because even after 2 years, he doesn't when he didn't turn up to Boston. Obviously, the people of Boston, as well as Hester herself, they presumed that he might have dead. Okay, so when she surprisingly sees her husband after 2 years, and it is somewhat like she feels guilty and she feels like deprived because she started thinking, where was he all these years? So he asks a man in the crowd about her because she was identifying him, and she was looking at him from standing afar, from standing in the marketplace. And so there, Roger Schillingworth, her husband, was inquiring the local man in the crowd at the marketplace about her and about her guilty, and he was told the story of his wife's adultery. So he, with so much of rage and angriness, he exclaims that the child's father should also be punished and vows to find the man. So he chooses a new name, Rover Shillingworth, to aid him in his plan. So Reverend John Wilson and the minister of her church, Arthur Dimsdale, question Hester, but she refuses to name her lover because they wanted to punish him as well, the other party of adultery. But Hester Prynne, she doesn't want to name him. After she returns to her prison cell, the jailer brings in Roger Shillingworth, a physician, to calm Hester and her child with his roots and herbs. Dismissing the jailer, Shillingworth demands to know the name of the child's father. But Hester Prynne, she refuses, and he takes a oath, and he insists that she never revealed that he is her husband. And he also takes a vow from her that you should not reveal the identity of your husband, because you are also not revealing the identity of the other party who had committed adultery with you. So later, Hester agrees to Shillingworth's terms, even though she suspects that she will regret it. So, after being released from prison, Hester settles in a cottage at the edge of a town, at the outskirts of the village, and earns a meager living with her needlework. And she lives a quiet life with her daughter Pearl. She is troubled by her daughter's unusual character, and Pearl is a mischievous and playful daughter. As an infant, Pearl is fascinated by the scarlet letter which Hester Prynne was wearing on her dress. As she grows older, she becomes moody and unruly, and her conduct start rumors, and the church members suggest Pearl be taken away from Hester. So Hester, hearing the rumors that she may lose Pearl, she wants to speak to Governor Bellingham. With him are Reverend Wilson and Dimsdale, and when Wilson questions Pearl about her catechism, she refuses to answer, even though she knows the correct response. Appeals to Reverend Dimsdale in desperation, and the minister persuades the governor to let Pearl remain in Hester's care. So, because Dimsdale health has begun to fail, the townspeople are happy to have Shillingworth because he was a doctor, and townspeople suggest Dimsdale to take to consult this doctor, in order to recover from his illness. So, being in close contact with Dimsdale, Shillingworth begins to suspect that the minister's illness is the result of some unconfessed guilt. And he is not suffering from physical health, but he is suffering from his psychological health. Okay, so he started suspecting about his unconfessed guilt. So he pressurizes the minister psychologically because he suspects Dimsdale to be Pearl's father. Got it? So one evening, pulling the sleeping Dimsdale vestment aside, Shillingworth sees something startling on the chest of that sleeping minister, that is the scarlet letter A. Whereas the Hester Prynne was wearing that letter on the dress, whereas here the Shillingworth, he has written a scarlet letter on his chest because he was also involved in that adultery with Hester Prynne, but he was not able to confess it and accept before the public because he was too conscious, and moreover he was holding a position like minister, and he was a public figure. And he was so much afraid of the public. So, tormented by his guilty conscience, Dimsdale goes to the square where Hester was punished. Climbing the scaffold, he calls Hester and Paul to join him. This is the second scaffold scene. I told you that first happens where Hester Prynne, she comes out of the Boston prison holding a child, a small infant on her hand, and she was made to stand on the scaffold in a marketplace. So this is the second scaffold scene where Dimsdale goes to the square and he climbs the scaffold to call Hester and Paul to join him. There he admits his guilt to them but cannot find the courage to do so in publicly. Suddenly, Dimsdale sees a meteor forming a gigantic A across the sky, and simultaneously Pearl points towards the shadowy figure of Robert Shillingworth. And Hester, shocked by Dimsdale's deterioration, decides to obtain a release from her oath of silence to her husband. So, in her discussion of about this scaffold scene, about this episode with Shillingworth, she tells him that his obsession with revenge must be stopped in order to save his own soul. So, several days later, what happens is Hester meets Dimsdale in the forest, where she removes the scarlet letter from her dress and tells Dimsdale about Shillingworth and his revenge. What was his revenge? He wanted to punish the other partner who had committed the adultery with whom? With Hester Prynne. So, in this conversation, she convinces Dimsdale to leave Boston in secret on a ship to Europe, where they can start a fresh life or a new life together. So, renewed by this plan, the minister seems to gain energy. So, Pearl, however, refuses to acknowledge either of them until Hester replaces her symbol of shame on her dress. See, this shows that how Pearl is so much associated and obsessed with that letter A, because when Hester Prynne just throws that letter on away, but Pearl, she feels disappointed because she loves that letter very much. See how there is an interconnection between Pearl and that letter. because even psychologically, and even we also know the hidden meaning, because of committing adultery, Esther was sorry, Pearl was born out of wedlock, right? So returning to town, Dimsdale loses heart in their plan. So he doesn't want to commit that, he doesn't want to escape from that village as a guilt-ridden person. So he has become a changed man once for all and knows that he is going to die. So meanwhile, Hester is informed by the captain of ship on which they are to sail to Europe that Robert Schillingworth will also be a passenger. So on election day, Dimsdale gives what is declared to be one of his most inspiring sermons. But as the procession leaves the church, Dimsdale stumbles and almost falls. So, seeing Hester and Pearl in the crowd watching the parade, he climbs upon the scaffold. This is the third scaffold scene, very important scene, and confesses his sin, dying in Hester's arms. So later, witnesses swear that they saw this stigma in the form of the scarlet letter A upon his chest. So she sees Shillingworth, losing his revenge, dies shortly thereafter, after the death of Dimmesdale, and leaves Pearl a great deal of money, enabling her to go to Europe with her mother and make a wealthy marriage. So, several years after, Hester returns to Boston, resumes wearing the scarlet letter, and becomes a person to whom other women turn for solace. And she becomes a sister of charity. So, when she dies, she is buried next to her lover, Arthur Dimmesdale, and they share a simple slate tombstone with the inscription on the field sable, the letter A cures. Okay, this is the plot line of the story and the detailed analysis of the novel. So, this novel is one of the noted novel, and it can be considered as the masterpiece of American literature. Got it. So the action takes place in Boston, a colony of the Massachusetts Bay Company, whose residents were Puritans. So Puritans were members of a religious movement founded in England and whose congregations promoted ideals that helped to lay the foundation for American democracy. So they followed a strict moral code, and they were always on the lookout for satanic influences. So their government was theocratic, and they were deeply influenced by the theosophical what theology and biblical citations, teachings, and they emphasized divine guidance over human reason. So the story is about Hester Prynne, who is given a scarlet letter to wear as a symbol of her adultery. So her life is closely tied to two other characters. One is Roker Schillingworth, her husband, and Arthur Dimmesdale, her minister and the father of the child, and her ardent lover. So the structure of the novel is like this. It is very tight, and all the events are interrelated and skillfully crafted and integrated into a logical sequence. So, um, here, just I would like to quote one important critic and writer's novel about this novel. Her name is author Brenda Weinlaub. Okay, author Brenda Wineapple. She describes Hawthorne's writing of the Scarlet Letter in this way. Through its prose is slightly formal and its phrasings aphoristic and rhythmatically intact and exact. So the story's smoldering emotions are so volatile and that Hawthorne regulates them in the book's shapely design. So the tale of Hester Prynne unfolds in 24 chapters, with the first, 12th, and the last symmetrically organized around the scaffold scenes. Okay, where are the three scaffold scenes in what unfolds to the readers in the first? Okay, here in this novel we have 24 chapter. We have three scaffold scenes, and with the important symbol, the scarlet letter A, in order to simplify the gist of the novel. So the first scaffold scene takes place in the first chapter, and the second scaffold scene unfolds in the 12th chapter, and the last and the third scaffold scene unfolds us or unfolds to us in the last chapter, 24th chapter, and they were what I can say symmetrically organized around the scaffold scene on which Hester appears to suffer for the crime of adultery. So, for example, it is called the interior of the heart, which suggests how the private and the public worlds are so often at tragic variance. So, this is how author Brenda Wine Apple she talks about this novel. So, as I have already mentioned, there are many themes in this novel. One is the first and foremost is sin, rejection, and redemption. Okay, as this novel revolves around sin, sin, repentance, as well as the punishment. So, sin, rejection, and redemption can also be called as the important or the central themes of this novel. So Hester must wear a red badge of shame, identifying her sin as an adulteress, right? And making her as an outcast in her community because where she was forced to live with her small child at the outskirts of the community. So on the pillory, she endures the glare of scornful eyes and thereafter lives on the outskirts of the town with her child Pearl. So, however, though Hester has committed the grave sin, which the Puritan society was considered adultery as, she redeems herself by acknowledging her immoral behavior. Accepting her punishment and living an exemplary life, she emerges from adulteress as an angel. So, in a way, the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale is also an outcast in that though he lives within the community, but he lives as a coward, not as a brave woman like Hester Prynne. So, he is, though he is a very good man and a very principled man, only because he was so much conscious of the public and his appearance and his position in the public in the society, he was so much guilt ridden, and finally he dies with as a what we can say a loyal lover by declaring and by accepting his fault on the scaffold scene. Okay, and he dies with the arms of the Hester Prynne. So, however, at the end of the novel, Arthur Dimmesdale too redeems himself by exposing his sin of adultery. Okay, adultery. So the next important theme is that identity and society. After Hester, see, Nathaniel Hawthorne has uh, woven, or what we can say, yeah, very creatively woven these themes through the character of Hester, where the identity and society can be considered as one of the themes. Like after history, Hester is publicly rebuked and forced by the people to wear a badge of shame, that is the scarlet letter, her unwillingness to leave Boston is surprising, because had they been somebody else in her place, they would have definitely left that Boston to Europe, and they would have settled peacefully. But this lady is very strong and she doesn't want to leave that place. Instead, she wants to live in that place by wearing that badge of shame. And she is not physically imprisoned, and leaving the town would allow her to remove the badge and lead a normal life. But unexpectedly, Hester reacts with dismay when Shillingworth tells her that the town fathers are considering letting her remove the letter. So Hester's behavior is premised on her desire to determine her own identity, that let others determine it for her, because she wanted to show how strong she is, and she wanted to show them, though I have committed adultery, but her she wanted her child to be with the crowd. Okay, she wanted to, why she wanted to live in Boston, because she was in deeply love with that author Dimsdale. Okay, she doesn't want to leave that place because she wanted to show, though he was, when she was treated as an outcast or marginalized marginalized person, but still she wanted to be with the touch with that village or the town where she was living. So to her, running away or removing the letter would be admitting that the society has power over her. Got it. So if she removes that letter or if she escapes from that place, Boston, she thought that it would be somewhat like a escapism. So she wanted to prove her strength and she wanted to prove her genuine character by wearing that letter. It's okay, doesn't matter. I'll wear this letter and I'll live with my child here. And she wanted to show the Puritan society that what you are doing is wrong and what I had done is crime, of course, but what you are doing to the individual and that to a lady is a heinous crime. So instead, she doesn't want to leave the most Puritan society, leave that Boston place. Instead, she stays, refiguring the Scarlet Letter as a symbol of her own identity and her own experiences, and she wanted to show her own genuine character. So her past sin is a part who she is and to pretend what she is. Okay, so that's why she says that she thinks that to pretend that it never happened would mean denying a part of herself. She doesn't want to live a pretentious life in moving away from the city and living in some other alien land. Thus, Hester is determined to integrate her sin into her life. So, Arthur Dimmesdale also struggles against a socially determined identity. As the minister, he is more symbolic and more symbol than a human being, except for Shillingworth. Those around the minister willfully ignore his internal torment or misinterpreting it as holiness. Unfortunately, Arthur Dimmesdale he never fully recognizes the truth of what Hester has learned, and that individuality and strength are gained by quiet self assertion and not by a rejection of one's assigned identity. Got it? So, the next important theme of this novel is the nature of evil. So, how the characters in this novel frequently debate the identity of the black man, the representation of evil. So over the course of the novel, the black man is associated with Dimmesdale. So here, the black man, why they want to call as a black man? Because his identity is unknown. So the people, the other characters in this novel, they are so much curious to know the identity of the black man. Okay, so Shillingworth and Mistress Hibbins and Little Pearl is thought by some to be the devil's child. Shillingworth and Mistress Hibbins, a minor character, Mistress Hibbins. She always calls Pearl as a devil's child because whose father's identity is unknown. The characters are also try to root out the cause of evil. And did Shillingworth's selfishness in marrying Hester forces her to commit the crime? Because we readers, after reading this story, we can also start analyzing this time only because of the Shillingworth's absence in whose life absence in Hester Prynne's life made her to commit adultery with Dimmesdale, or who is responsible for this evil. Partially, that can also be considered as one of the reasons for this adultery. Had he been with Hester Prynne, definitely she would not have committed that kind of a crime of adultery. So, or so many questions pop up in our mind. Is Hester and Dimmesdale deed responsible for Shillingworth's transformation into male violent being? This confusion over the nature and uh, causes of the evil reveals the problems with Puritan conception of sin. So, as the narrator points out, the mysterious narrator, as we have, points out in the concluding chapters, that both emotions, hate and love, depend upon the high degree of intimacy, and each renders one individual dependent upon one another. So, this is how the narrator points out in the concluding chapter. So, the love, hate, or emotions depend upon a high degree of intimacy between people. So evil is not found in Hester and Dimmesdale's physical relationship, nor even in the ignorance of the Puritan fathers. but it is found in the carefully plotted revenge of Shillingworth, whose love has been perverted. He had become pervert. Okay, because he doesn't while analyzing this character, we can understand that nowhere Chillingworth talks to Hester Prynne in a very loving manner, and he was not at all an affectionate husband, but he wanted to take revenge on the black man, whose identity is unknown, who was a partly responsible for that adultery, and he wanted to avenge him. Okay, nowhere he wanted to give solace. At least after his death, he leaves behind a very rich ancestral property to Pearl. At least by the deed or the work he had done after his death, at least that is laudable. Got it? So he, Shillingworth, who should love Pearl, will not even publicly acknowledge her, and neither Dimsdale. So this denial of love, one's own child, is perpetrating evil further. And though Dimsdale loves to talk to Pearl and he loves to play with Pearl, but he could not do it publicly because he was so much afraid of his position. And there are important symbols in this novel, very important symbol. First and foremost, the letter A. This is called the Scarlet Letter, right? The chief symbol in this novel is that the Scarlet Letter A, which openly symbolizes Hester's adultery. And for Dimmesdale and Hester, the letter stands for agony, whereas it stands for adultery, but for Dimmesdale and Hester, it stands for agony, which Hester displayed in her isolated life, which Dimmesdale displays in her deteriorating health. So by the end of the novel, the townspeople think that Hester's scarlet letter A stands for ability, for she has become a generous helper for the poor and the downtrodden people and a wise counselor for their problems. So later, at the end of the novel, from the adulteress, Hester Prynne has emerged as an angel and able. Got it? So the just gesture of Dimmesdale's placing his hand over his heart is also symbolic, and it is the minister attempt to cover his mark of sinfulness. Why he wants to place his hand over his heart? Because there he has carved letter A, and which also symbolizes that his attempts to cover his mark of sinfulness. So it also suggests that his nervous condition or his timid condition and reflects his grieved state. So then becomes later we have a important symbol called the meteor. So as Dimsdale stands on the scaffold scene, this is the second scaffold scene I'm talking about. There, with Hester and Pearl, the meteor traces an A in the night sky. So, to Dimmesdale, the meteor implies that he should also wear a mark of shame, just as Hester does. So, the meteor is interpreted differently by the rest of the community, that which thinks it stands for angel and marks Governor Winthrop's entry into heaven. So, but angel is awkward reading of the symbol. The Puritans commonly look to symbols to confirm divine sentiment. So, in this narrative, Hawthorne, especially, however, he makes symbols play a very important role because as he is portraying the 17th century Puritan English society. Got it. So, however, symbols are taken to mean what the beholder wants them to mean. The incident with the meteor highlights two different uses of symbols. One is Puritan and another one is literary. So another important thing is that darkness and light, they also form very important symbols, sorry, by emphasizing the alternation between the sunlight and the darkness. The novel organizes the plot's events into two categories: those which are socially acceptable and those which must take place covertly. So daylight exposes an individual's activities and makes him or her vulnerable to punishment. So on the night, on the other hand, conceals and enables activities that would not be possible for or acceptable during the day. For example, Arthur Dimmesdale, I told you, Arthur Dimmesdale, he wants to meet Hester and Pearl. during dark, because especially the second scaffold scene where it was dark, it takes place in the dark one rainy night. He stands on the scaffold and he admits his sin or guilt before Hester and Pearl, whereas he can't do it during daytime, right? So these notions of visibility versus concealment are interlinked to two of book's larger themes. One is inner versus socially assigned identity, and of outer appearances versus internal states, internal mindset. So night is the time when inner natures, uh, inner being can make themselves visible. During the day, interiority is once again hidden from the public view, and secret remains as they are. So there are three important characters, major characters in this novel. First and foremost, Hester Prynne, then comes Arthur Dimmesdale, and later Roma Schillingworth, and even Pearl. Pearl, she is a daughter of Hester Prynne and Dimmesdale. Four important characters in this novel. It is easy for you to remember. So I thought of teaching this novel because it is loaded with meaning, loaded with important central themes, and very loaded with important symbols and imagery. So, what is most, let me analyze the important characters, especially major characters. Hester Prynne. First and foremost, what is most remarkable about this character is her enormous strength of the character, right? Her remarkable strength of character. While Nathaniel Hawthorne, the writer of this novel, doesn't give much information about her life before the book opens, he shows her remarkable character, and he revealed through her public humiliation and subsequent isolated life in Puritan society. There, when she makes up her mind to live at the outskirts of the village, outskirts of the city, Boston city, along with her small child, which shows her strong inner, what we can say, is the strength or the remarkable strength. So, her inner strength, her defiance of the convention, her honesty, and her compassion may have been in her character all along, but the Scarlet Letter brings them to our attention. What the Scarlet Letter? And she very boldly she wears that letter on her bosom, right? So Hester is physically described in the first scaffold scene as a tall young woman with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale, as I have already mentioned. This is how Nathaniel Hawthorne describes her character and personality. So she is a tall young woman, very beautiful, and figure of a perfect elegance on a large scale. So her most impressive feature is that her dark and abundant hair, a very thick hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam. And she has a silky hair and she has a dark eyes and very attractive eyes. So this appearance can be contrasted with her appearance after 7 years of punishment. So her beautiful hair is hidden under her cap, and her beauty and warmth are gone, buried under the burden of scarlet letter. So when she removes that letter and takes off the cap in chapter 13, she once again becomes the symbol of beauty or the radiant beauty of 7 years ago. So symbolically in doing this, Hester removes the harsh, dark and stark, unbending Puritan social and moral values. Alright. So, but she is the only to have a brief respite. However, because Pearl angrily demands that she resume wearing that letter. Because I told you this Pearl, she has been born and brought up with watching that letter on her mother's bosom. So when Hester Prynne just throws away this letter, and she wanted to be free from the Puritan order, social and moral orders of the society. But Pearl, she gets angry and she angrily demands her mother to wear it again. So that we readers or the students of literature, we should understand how we first meets the incredible strong Hester on the first scaffold scene with Pearl in her arms, beginning her punishment. So she displays a sense of irony and contempt. The irony is present in the elaborate needlework of the scarlet letter. And while see, though she was made to wear that letter, she just wants to embroider that letter with a golden color thread, which means that she just wants to. She accepts the punishment because she wanted her soul to go through redemption. Okay, and she wanted to have a salvation by being punished. So while she might be feeling agony, her face betrays no such thoughts, and she displays a dignity, and she is full of grace and charm that reveals a deep trust in herself, and she is so much of self-confident. So her refusal to name the child's father, which also shows her determination to stand alone despite the opinion of the society. She just doesn't care, though the ministers, though the priest, and though the public forced her to name the black man, which means the man or the other partner who had committed that adultery. She did not open her mouth, and she was strongly determined not to punish Dimsdale or not to reveal the identity of Dimsdale because she loves him so much and she doesn't want to punish him. And she, at the same time, she doesn't want him to lose his respect and the identity in the eyes of the public. So, despite her lonely existence, Hester somehow finds her inner strength to defy both the townspeople and the local government. So, this defiance becomes stronger and will carry her through later interviews with both Shillingworth and Governor Bellingham. So her determination and lonely stand is repeated again and again when she confronts Governor Bellingham over the issue of Pearl's guardianship. So a second quality of Hester Prynne is that she is above all honest. I told you because when she openly acknowledges her sin of adultery, she becomes honest, and she is strong enough, and she was very honest enough to admit to Shillingworth that she felt no love nor fake it, no any in their marriage. And she says, I was forcefully married to you. There was no love between, no love from, no love for you. Like that, in one particular episode, she openly declares that she felt no love nor faked anything in their wedding. So she kept her word in carrying her husband's secret identity and tells the minister that the truth only when she is released from the pledge. So, in this life of public repentance, she retains her sanity and security while Dimsdale seems to be losing his. So, finally, we think that Hester becomes an angel of mercy who eventually puts out of her life. Lives her life by lending help to the poor and the needy people. So she offers comfort to the poor, downtrodden, and the sick people. Hawthorne attributes this transformation to her lonely position in the world and her suffering. So, in her solitude, she had a great deal of time to think, and her shame in the face of public opinion, her lonely and suffering, and her quiet acceptance of her position make her respond to the calamities of others. So Hester Prince's strength, honesty, compassion, and what we can say, the helping nature, which carry her throughout her life. So she lived on quietly by growing stronger and more at peace through her suffering, thus become a legend in the colony of Boston. So from adulteress, she raised to the angel at the end of her life. So there are many other characters, Robert Shillingworth and Arthur Dimmesdale, Pearl. Okay, so you have to go through this novel. Only you can understand this novel only. You have to study it thoroughly. So hope I think I made myself clear. There are other minor characters. Even Pearl cannot be considered as a major character. The Pearl can be considered Pearl. She is the daughter of what I told you, Hester Prynne and Dimmesdale, and she plays a minor role, but still a significant role. And we have Mistress Hibbins. I told you, she always calls Pearl as a devil's child. I had already mentioned, and that is also very important. And I thought of doing Whitman's poetry because it is very important for your examination sake. There are four poems of Walt Whitman prescribed for you in this year. When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Okay, this poem was published in 1865 in a series of pieces after Lincoln's assassination. So, while it does not display all the conventions of the form, this is nevertheless considered to be a pastoral elegy. And some, according to some critics and what we can say scholars, they consider this poem as an elegy, a poem of mourning that makes use of elaborate conventions drawn from the natural world and a rustic human society. So this poem can be considered as a pastoral elegy. We can compare this poem to that of Milton's Lycidas and Shelley's Adonais, are the two best known examples in the English tradition. Okay, so this poem, the when Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, where makes reference to the problems of the modern times in its brief. So it also displays the shadowy depiction of the Civil War battles and the death of the soldiers and bloodshed, everything. So the natural order is contrasted with the human one, and the Whitman goes so far as to suggest that those who have died violent deaths in war are actually the lucky ones. Here, Walt Whitman, what we can say, he can be called as a transcendental poet. Okay, and he had a great love and respect towards the president of what I told you, America, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. So that's why after the death of Lincoln, he had written this poem. So, in this poem itself, he wanted to portray the natural order, how it is contrasted with the human order, and how Whitman also goes on so far as to suggest that those who have died in a violent war, they are the heroes and they are the lucky ones. So, since they are now beyond the suffering, so he says that the worldly life is full of suffering. So he also wanted to project the predicament of a modern man in this world filled with wars and deaths. So above all, this is a public poem of private mourning. He says, in order to put it in a simple term, this poem can be considered as the public poem of a private mourning. So in it, Whitman tries to determine the best way to mourn a public figure and the best way to mourn in a modern world. So, in his resignation at the end of the poem and in his use of disconnected motive symbols, Walt Whitman suggests that the kind of ceremonial poetry a pastoral elegy represents may no longer have a place in society. Instead, symbolic, intensely personal forms must take over. So, to conclude, this poem, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, is composed of three separate yet simultaneous poems. One follows the progress of Lincoln's coffin on its way to President's burial. So, how the second stanza it portrays with the poet and his sprig of lilac meant to be laid on the coffin in tribute as he ruminates on death and mourning. So the third uses the symbols of a bird. Okay, there are so like what I can say, W.B. Yeats, he also uses too many symbols to connote meanings and to what I can say to express the words and to the what I can say to convey some important things or the notes. So the third symbol he uses is that of a bird. Okay, where a bird and a star to develop an idea of a nature sympathetic to a great human being and how nature also mourns for the death of a great leader. The progression of the coffin is followed by a sad irony, and mourners dressed in black and holding offerings of flowers turn out in the streets to see Lincoln's corpse pass by. And this is how the people were dressed in black and how he uses bird, star, and the flower, lila, to what convey the things or his expression or feelings for the death of his favorite leader. So the poet offers only, he says, just I would like to quote from the poem: Lilac and star and bird twinned with the chant of his soul. He says, Lilac, star, and a bird twined with the chant of his soul. Eventually, the poet simply leaves behind the sprig of lilac and ceases from his song, and still unsure of just how to mount properly. So next, here you have a what small poem, O Captain and My Captain. This is a simple poem by Walt Whitman, and again you have a noiseless patient spider. These are the poems have been prescribed for you this year, and it is your work to go through this poem, since you can easily understand, because Walt Whitman, he uses simple language to write poetry and to convey the things. But in order to understand his symbols and images, or his central conflict of the poem, or the central idea of the poem, you need to understand and you need to read between the lines. Then only you are able to understand his poetry. That's all for today. Thank you so much. If you have any doubts, as I have been telling you, that you are free to talk to us. Thank you. Thanks a lot.